Hello world, Bubble here. Welcome to my first Color Divide Q&A. You asked me questions on my project on Scratch, and I'm going to be answering as many as possible as best I can. Okay, let's get to it then. First question, what do you look like in real life? Well, Bubblegumby, I am so pleased you asked. Because animating my blue bubble self talking just then was becoming a real pain in the butt. Okay, let's get to the next question then, shall we? Whoa! Okay, the question that was asked the most is where the inspiration for Color Divide came from. And that's actually quite a story. It all started with an invitation to a roleplay studio on Scratch. The roleplay was called the Color Divide RPG, founded by a user called Ninja Girl. The premise of the setting for the RPG was a fantasy world where citizens were ranked according to the strength of their magical talent. I accepted the invite and created my character. Together with 4 other Scratchers, we began to create a story together by role-playing with our characters in the comments, which was all cool and fun until it was the middle of the night. But as it usually happens with me, I got a flash of inspiration. I could suddenly picture our story so clearly. My mind was exploding with images of characters we'd only ever described in writing. And I wanted to bring these images to life. I thought, whoa, this will make a pretty good movie. Of course, at the time, I was just really irritated by all of this because I was trying to sleep. So the next morning, I decided to do something crazy. I wanted to animate a trailer for the RPG, using the story we'd made so far. At the time, I wasn't really thinking about what the response would be to it, or where I was going to go next with it, or even if I'd share it in the end at all. I literally just wanted to get the images out of my head and onto my computer screen. Sounds like it was a great idea, right? Right. I had never animated in my life before. I think if I had stopped to think about it for a moment, for like 2 seconds, I would have not known when to start and just abandoned it. Good thing I wasn't thinking clearly then, because 3 days of 6-hour sessions on the PC later, I ended up with this. The Color Divide RPG trailer. I wasn't actually planning on making an actual animated series out of it at first, but after a lot of encouragement from my fellow roleplayers and others from the Scratch community, I decided I was crazy enough to want to try. 3 months later, I finished episode 1, and around that time, I separated myself from the RPG in order to focus on my work. 6 months after that, I finished episode 2, and those 2 episodes are largely based on the story that me and the 4 other roleplayers created, though I still had a ton of character development, world building, and plot edits to make it workable as a full-on story. As of the time I'm making this video, June 2016, I'm currently working on episode 3. By this point, though they still are the characters and some recognizable elements, my story has completely diverged from the one me and my 4 other friends created all those months ago. If the roleplay was the seed, what I've made is now a garden. And I have, and continue to, pour everything I have working on this garden. Which is actually a weird analogy for me to make, since I don't like gardening. And there concludes the story of the beginnings of Color Divide. Next question. Where is episode 3? As of the time making this video, I'm working towards finishing it by early August. Why August? Because I enjoy setting crazy and probably unattainable goals for myself. Also kind of because that's when I'm going to visit MIT to speak at the Scratch conference. That still feels crazy to say out loud. How many episodes are you planning on making? I have no idea. However many I need to tell the story I want to tell. Could be anything between 7 and 15. When you first came up with the Color Divide, what did you expect it to be like? Did you think it would get this big? And did you even plan on sharing it on Scratch? I actually started making the trailer on my test account because I didn't think anyone would want to see it besides my roleplay friends. I'm really glad that I did share it on my main account and that I shared it at all. I was not expecting the attention it received, and I'm so grateful to everyone who supported me and Color Divide along the way. Bubble, I've noticed that animation is so easy, but when it comes to art, it's hard. On my Animal Quest animation, there's a lot of moving, so what do you recommend for my animation? Vector, which will take a long time, or bitmap, because there's lots of action in my show? Well, that happened. I find the Scratch vector editor a lot easier for me to animate my drawings with than the bitmap one, but it really is up to what your personal preference is. You shouldn't be forcing yourself to use an editor that doesn't gel with you and the way you work. That said, I personally prefer the vector editor because while at first it can be a bit counterintuitive for drawing, it's very intuitive for animating. It changes your mindset when you're working with an image made up of different shapes instead of a flat bitmap image. It's not a big leap to imagine how you can make those shapes move. It's super easy to just duplicate the costume and move it. Often that cuts down the amount of extra drawing you'd have to do. How did you decide on which background characters to use? Even though I saw many suggestions that would fit pretty well into the episode, how did you choose to only pick a few? What did you look for? First of all, I'm going to give a bit of context to anyone who doesn't know about this background characters thing. Right after my trailer was featured on the homepage of Scratch, there were a lot of Scratchers joining the roleplay and making characters of their own. And many of them wanted to be a part of the animation that I'd started making. So what I decided to do was to incorporate many Scratchers' roleplay characters into the episodes as faces in the crowd and scenery. Background characters. So the color divide roleplayers and supporters could be a part of the animations too. But there's not always enough space for everyone's, so I have to decide the few that I'm going to put in. And the thing I look for in those characters is diversity. Has any person in Aurora gotten a color but then left Aurora by choice? This is not an impossible situation, but it's highly unlikely. Aurorans don't see the world beyond the gates as an option. It's a place where people go, and you don't see them again. If they were really unhappy with the ways of the city, they will be more likely to rebel and try to change things from within. But even that is unlikely because, in my experience, in the real world, people tend to cling to their privilege. What do your family think of color divide? I really think I wouldn't have come as far as I have if it wasn't for the support of my family. They're the first ones to see my work and give me feedback on it, like if the narrative is easy to follow or not, or if the walk cycles are too stilted, or even if I'm actually just too stressed and should just step away from the computer and take a break. That happens a lot. Do you use storyboards for your animating? What is your process for making the animation? Allow me to walk you through it. This is my ideas book, where it all starts, the planning. This is when I first started planning the first episode. Stage 1 for me is the brain vomit. I empty out all my ideas that are floating around in my head onto paper. Stage 2 is the skeleton. I found that coming up with just a basic list of each event that happens in the episode works as a really good framework for the complex script. Stage 3, the dialogue. I like to plan out everything that the characters say before the animation script, because then I'm focusing more on the narrative and the information that needs to be conveyed. It's just a kind of easy progression from the skeleton, which is also just narrative planning, not the visuals that the viewer is going to be seeing in the finished episode. Stage 4, the animation script. Currently, I like working with a checklist, something like this. That way, I can tick off each item on the list as I animate it and calculate what percentage I finished from that. I have 221 items on my episode 3 animation script. For some tricky scenes that I can't easily describe in one checklist item, I scribble down a sketch of what I want it to look like and the different camera angles that I want to have in it. And the last stage, animating. Basically, I just sit down at my computer for long periods of time and work at bringing my animation script to life. And forget to do irritating things like eating and sleeping, sometimes along the way. When you are animating, how do you get organized and make sure everything gets done on time? So the whole process is very heavily time consuming, and with school and other things still going on for me, it's become a necessity for me to stay organized. So I have multiple ways to plan my life. Number 1, my quarterly goals. This is an idea I got from one of my YouTube heroes, Jenna Morassi, and so far it's been working really well for me. I basically have a list of things that I want to achieve each quarter of the year, and I keep it on my iPod so it's always there, staring me in the face, and I can easily tick things off as I achieve them. These are the long-term, big kind of goals. Number 2, my to-do list. This is pretty short-term stuff that I need to do in the near future. It often ends up being things that I'm doing for other people online or schoolwork, so it's not my favorite list to look at. The purpose of it is to keep my mind clog-free. Without a list to keep track of things I need to do, I get stressed trying to keep it all in my head at once. Number 3, a calendar. It really just helps me with keeping track of the timescale that I'm working with while working on the other things on my other 2 lists. How do you have the tenacity to actually finish an animation? I always give up halfway. Being this motivated to create something and keep on at it is actually a relatively new experience for me. I've never felt this driven to even attempt a project of this scale before. I just feel that this is a story that's begging to be told, and motivation is basically dragging me by the throat to the finish line at this point. There are times when I'm feeling really down and uninspired and insecure, but I have to ride those out and jump back in because it's something that I'm passionate about. Who do you really look up to when it comes to animating? That's gotta be the now inactive Scratcher, Skystar. Once as a new Scratcher, I came across her work and was completely mind blown. And that still left an impact on me today. The way she can communicate emotion and narrative through animation is something that I really admire. Other Scratchers whose work I'm also really inspired by is that of Bubblebomb, Blazeheart, and Marsbars. You guys are awesome. What is the testing hall woman's name? It's Lillian, actually, but more on that in episode 3. Why must the characters have such horrible lives? This is actually a bit of an inside joke me and Lady Nightlaw have. As storytellers, we both can be pretty horrible to our characters at times. A fun technique I like to use when stuck for plot advancements is making a list of the top 10 worst possible things that I could do to the characters, and then choosing some of those. As much of a monster that sometimes makes me feel, it's just unavoidable. As humans, we sympathize and root for characters more that struggle with hardship and still come out on the other side. How come nobody ever noticed that Phage's house got burned down with magic? It's like a random bystander just thinks, oh, some guy just set that house on fire and arrested some guy. No biggie, kind of a plot hole there. It works in the magician's favor for bystanders to see the rebel's arrest. It makes an example of what happens if you go up against the system, and instills fear in the citizens who are considering it. This is the kind of thing that has happened many times before in authoritarian regimes. Do you have any tips for lip sync? The most important piece of advice that I have for you is this. Don't let it intimidate you, because it's not actually as hard as it looks. Once you got a rhythm going, it actually is pretty simple. All lip sync is a bunch of frames with the mouth in different positions. You only need a few of them since many sounds look very similar when being spoken. Then, all you need to do is cycle through them while playing a sound. This part can be a little tricky at first, and it's very trial and error with the timings, but with a bit of practice, it actually becomes a bit boring. My last tip is, remember, a mirror is your best friend when lip syncing. Use it to guide you by observing what shapes your mouth makes when you speak different sounds. Even though that can make you look a bit crazy when you're actually doing it in real life and people are watching you. Would it be possible to actually die during the test? Not directly. For example, if in the test you fell in a pit of lava, you wouldn't be physically harmed when you came out of it, but you would experience the pain of burning to death, and the trauma of that would stay in your memory forever. Lovely! Seems like a great thing to subject 12-year-olds to, am I right? That's really messed up. Have you planned any Easter eggs or hidden references? I don't actually have any in the way you mean, though I do have a lot of underlying themes, symbols, and parallels to our world woven in. Each character actually has a specific theme or message that they're exploring or conveying to the audience. Can I help with voice acting? So far I've hosted voice auditions twice. As of this point, I'm not planning on having any more, as I've got the still to be introduced characters' voices already covered. The answer to these is, I don't know. I don't know where my passions will take me next after Color Divide. I'll see how it goes. And that's all the answers I have for you today. Now I'll be handing over to the Color Divide characters that you asked questions to. What made you, in that 1 second, decide you were going to just fail the test with this girl you'd never known before? It was probably the biggest decision I've ever made. In that moment, I just knew. I knew I wouldn't be able to pass the test. I knew I was headed for the outside whether I wanted to or not. And for once, I wanted to be in control of my own life. When I failed that test, I wanted it to be on my own terms. and it made me braver knowing that I wouldn't be alone out there. What have you done that made you get kicked out of all those orphanages that you've been to? After the things that had happened to me, I couldn't view the world in the same way, and it showed in my cynical stare, my snide comments whenever the magicians were mentioned. Sometimes, I just couldn't bear to sit and be silent. That's what always got me into trouble. Why did you ever come to the gates?
That's a very personal story.
Do you feel bad about banishing harmless children? Or are you just evil or something? How would you feel if that happened to you, huh? Excuse you. My job is a brutal one, but someone has to take care of it. Else our city would be overrun with useless, magicless citizens unable to pull their weight. Or worse, rebellious scum who can infect the rest of the good citizens. Have you ever been hurt by the monsters? Yes, both physically and emotionally. I don't know how much more I can take, how many lives we'll lose. And it's not just the monsters my people and I face. Starvation, injury, disease. I've lost so many. Too many. What is the inside of the city like? Where are some good places to eat in the city?
Yeah, there's this real great place Josh and I love to visit. Come, I'll show you.
One of the things I've been busy with recently is building Aurora in Minecraft. One of those crazy middle of the night ideas again.
This is our favorite place because it feels like a home. Not that I would really know what it would feel like, but it probably feels something like the atmosphere here does. And I love it.
Thank you so much for watching!